From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts. Welcome to Community Catalysts, the podcast that examines the qualities of community leadership and the many paths and forms it can take. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman. I'm really glad you're here. Be sure to follow, subscribe, or tap the like button so you never miss an episode. Today, we're joined by Mayor Lisa Craig of Lodi, California, a city known for its agricultural roots and thriving wine industry. Beyond that, Lodi boasts its own electric utility, an advanced life support certified fire department, and nearly 400 acres of parkland. It's also leading in clean energy with a hydrogen hub project serving both residents and regional transit along the I-5 corridor. Lisa Craig was first elected to the City Council in December of 2022 and became mayor just a year later. I am excited to learn from her leadership journey and how she's driving key priorities like economic growth, downtown revitalization, transportation, and youth engagement. Mayor Lisa Craig, welcome to Community Catalysts.
Thank you, Matt. I'm really pleased to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Mayor, your bio is so interesting. You've had a long and distinguished professional career in the realm of historic preservation nationally, and you have deep expertise in city planning, property rehabilitation, community revitalization. Just give everyone a quick overview of your background.
My goodness. I think it really comes down to having such a strong interest in the architectural heritage and the character and quality, particularly of our historic downtowns and our traditional neighborhoods. That's really what got me into this field. And so I've been very fortunate not just to study it. A lot of people don't know that historic preservation is a key component of a lot of planning offices, for example, but to be able to experience it both in the commercial setting in large cities like Washington, D.C., where I served as the historic preservation officer for our beautiful national capital city, but also in small communities like Annapolis, Maryland. Some folks may know that's where the United States Naval Academy is. And so a beautiful and very old history for that particular city. And I was their director of historic preservation for that landmark city. So, but in between, I spent some time working with our military, doing private military housing revitalization at places like the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, working at Pearl Harbor, working at the Great Lakes Naval Training Center. So I've been able to see a lot of our country, the communities, the personnel that serve our military, their families, and also just working with government officials, whether it's federal, state, or local level, who are really deeply concerned about the quality and the economic vitality of their commercial centers and their communities in general. So really blessed to be in this field and back in my hometown now practicing.
Mayor, where was the moment that sparked your interest in revitalization and community development, these kinds of things? Where in your history did that take root?
My father was always a great lover of history. He still likes to watch the History Channel. So I think in some respects that rubbed off on me. And my mother was all about really appreciating things from the past, items from the past. I came to be a member of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And from there, I learned about this college in Savannah, Georgia, the Savannah College of Art and Design, and they had a major in historic preservation. And I thought, well, what better than to put together my love of history with my appreciation of our past and the architectural heritage of our past. I mean, Lodi is an agricultural community, but with a very strong architectural character that really defines our downtown and our surrounding neighborhoods. So that was it. And I was probably in my young 20s back then.
So you've worked all over the country. You've done projects all over the country. Has Lodi always been your home, or did you move back to Lodi?
I moved back to Lodi. I think I left, like a lot of young people do, to go off to college, to experiment on life on their own, to learn to live in different communities, different cultures. And while I came back for a short amount of time, I decided that really my opportunities were, for the most part, elsewhere in my profession. The West Coast is not the easiest place to practice historic preservation. People oftentimes feel as if we're such a new area. We're not, as they certainly are back east, established for a couple of centuries. And so there's a greater understanding of how historic preservation works in city planning and the value of protecting existing historic elements of your city, as well as revitalizing them. And I think that that is the part I focus on. I focus on the viable reuse of historic places to serve the current needs of communities. So it's not so much about historic preservation as museum pieces. It's about, living viable contributors to the local economy.
So I'm going to turn the subject, and I want to talk about Lodi specifically and your experiences there on city council and as mayor. But if I understand correctly, you still have your own consulting firm. You're still active on projects on a national basis, right?
I am, but as I think most individuals find when they become mayor, it is an all-consuming job. And so I have done, and I do a lot of training, to tell you the truth, really training that next generation of individuals involved in architectural history or historic preservation or downtown revitalization, training them as to the best means to working with their elected officials. I think that that's the benefit I have being one, but also just participating in conferences and workshops. And still, yes, doing some projects. I do a lot more policy research now and provide policy guidance to historic communities.
So take us back a little bit. How did you arrive at the decision to run for the council in the first place?
Well, I ended up running in 2022, but in 2020, I got involved back in my community of Lodi on the Planning Commission and then on our Architectural Review Commission. And when I moved back to Lodi in 2018, the point of that move was to really reconnect with my hometown. And when I came back, I realized that there were so many opportunities for me to move our community forward. They had not really yet understood, I think, and been able to be exposed to what I had been in the East Coast about how downtown can really be that economic driver. And so I noticed, as did a lot of individuals who may have returned or been living in Lodi, an increase of homelessness. I noticed that we had a great need in our public safety area. I noticed that our properties in the downtown area did not seem to be as healthy as they were when I left. I was seeing some infill locations. I was seeing some parking lots that weren't there that were previously filled with buildings before. So I really felt as if I could make a difference. And so back then, that's why I got on Planning Commission. That's why I got on the Architectural Review Committee. And then I decided that it wasn't so much being a staff person as I had been before working in city government at various times. It was really being a decision maker. It was being a local elected official. And I spoke with the man at that time, Mark Chandler, who was our mayor. And he, as many people had, he had a wine business. And he was like, I really want to focus on wine. I've served my 2 terms that I really want to serve. And we had a very good discussion. He was a great advisor to me, and he supported me in my run in 2022 for city council. And it was a tough run. There were 3 other people running against me. And as you may know, Matt, many of the communities in California have moved to district elections.
Yes.
So that was my introduction. And while I was a native and my family had pretty deep roots here, I had to prove myself and did the same thing everybody else does, walked door to door to door to door and listened to my constituents. And then I realized, of course, my district was where I had grown up. It was my family home. It was where my elementary school was. It was where I used to play with my friends and go down to the local Foster Freeze and have ice cream after school. So I've been blessed to be able to serve my community in my hometown neighborhood. So that's kind of my story on how I got involved.
That's a great story. Mayor, I really want to ask you about the distinction between the role of a governing council and the role of a professional staff that you just mentioned. Usually, when I'm brought in to help city councils, especially when they're doing strategic planning or even when they have elements of dysfunction, I have to go in and put up kind of a yin yang chart. And I say ideally, a governing board, a governing council is responsible for what a community should accomplish over time, but that it's the professional staff that's responsible for how to get there. And in an ideal world, the staff doesn't tell the electeds what should be the goals, and the electeds don't tell the staff how to pursue it. So first, I want to see, do you buy the premise that I just laid out? And what's it like to be on the what side of the equation rather than the how side of the equation?
I think that's a really great question because I'm constantly trying to keep myself in check. I know, as having been staff before, we are there to administer the policies that are established by, in essence, the legislative body, our council. And in our form of government, our city manager is really the CEO or the executive that makes sure that all the staff are implementing that policy and that direction, as you correctly stated. I am a very big believer, and I think this is because of the fact that I had this experience when I was working in government in DC and in Annapolis, that if a council member comes to speak to me as a staff person to share, I'd like to do this, or I didn't like how this was handled, I respectfully listened to what they had to say and, thought about it, may have had some ideas, but I moved that conversation up to my immediate director, or if necessary, up to our city manager, because that's where that conversation needs to start. So I believe strongly in listening, but I also believe that, there is a chain of command. And the last thing I want to do is disrespect that chain and our city manager by having those conversations and, in essence, directing staff to do something. That is not our role as elected officials. Our key contact, and I think it was why this year has been so important in my service as mayor, is to ensure that we hire a really good city manager, which we did, but that we work very closely through our city manager in that chain of command to get what we need to have accomplished. And of course, we report to the citizens. Our bosses are the residents of our city. So we are accountable to them, and we serve as a key communication tool, a conduit to the city manager as it relates to the policies that are established.
So you are elected to council, but then you're appointed by your fellow council members to the position of mayor. Do I understand that?
That's correct. Yes.
So I just have to ask, since we're on this tack, you've got all this substantive experience and depth of knowledge. What is something about being on council and being mayor that your prior experience didn't prepare you for?
I have a very interesting council. It's quite a mix of individuals. I myself have much as you have, facilitated meetings with either elected officials or board members. How do you get to know each other? How do you work together? Going through the culture of that body to understand a little bit more how they can better function. And I think that is the biggest kind of learning experience I have gone through in the last 2 years here is, what are the viewpoints of my council members? We don't deal with politics. We're a nonpartisan body. And I find that in Lodi, that's absolutely the case. I think most of us are moderates. Doesn't matter which party we're a member of. Moderate to conservative in some respects, a lot of traditional family values. But that whole trying to work with your individual council members, not violating the Brown Act, as we know, but at the same time, understanding where they come from and what their roots are and what their values are, and how any issue that we might deal with as a council member it does have a personal tie to them or a professional tie to them. It has a tie to their family, to their neighborhood, to their constituents. And they have to make decisions based on what is best for their district. But I think our council in particular looks at what is best for the city as a whole. We are not so aligned with just the critical issues of our districts that we don't see the bigger picture. And so I think that establishing those personal relationships, respecting those personal relationships, and trying to assess where you have commonalities between the three votes you need to get what you need done. So,
Yeah, you're speaking to this idea that when you're elected to office, in any role, in council or mayor, you're responsible not just for your own perspective, but for weaving it into a fabric with your fellow council members, right? That together you're deliberating publicly about all the different ways you see an issue. And I think what's important here is that it's important that the public see this diverse variety of people having public discussion about how they see something differently, because they draw confidence from the idea that these diverse people earnestly are sitting down and trying to understand what the world looks like through someone else's eyes. Let's dive a little bit deeper into this, because you've talked about community engagement. I know that youth engagement is also is also important to you as well. What do you mean when you say community engagement? What is effective community engagement from your perspective?
I think that's a great question. Part of my consulting work I do now in historic preservation, and I do some disaster resilience or community resilience planning as well, is community engagement. And to me, that is us going to where the people are. And maybe that's my whole place-based understanding community. Go to the places that are matter to them and hear from them in their neighborhoods and in their territory where they feel comfortable.
Are you talking about community engagement as an equivalent of accessibility? Like if the mayor is here, if the council member is here at our park, at our ball field, at our grocery store, wherever, that our opportunity to have access, to ask questions, to offer comments, that it becomes a part of daily routine. Is that your point about engagement?
Yeah, I think that you need to be accessible. You need to be at many of the community events. I can't tell you, as mayor, you tend to get the invitation to present a certificate or be an honored guest or just join in with some of a nonprofit board's leadership at an event or an activity to demonstrate support by the city. But 9 times out of 10, when I'm there at those events, what am I doing? I am hearing from our constituents. I'm hearing from our residents. They're telling me about a concern. So it's not just about showing up and presenting a certificate. It's about talking with your residents within a format of, I am a local business owner, but I also support our parks. So I'm at this fundraising event, or I support our Boys and Girls Club, or I support our police foundation. And oftentimes you will hear at those events some of the issues and concerns that they have. Your responsibility then to me is to take that to the next level. And usually if I do have something specific after an event like that, I will go directly to the city manager and say, listen, I heard such and such. Can you help this community who feels as if there's a dangerous crossing or has had an alleyway which is just being neglected and it needs work? Could you please follow up on that? So it's a good way for us to get out into the street, so to speak, and bring those concerns back to our city's leadership.
So we were talking about leadership lessons that you picked up along the way. And as we were preparing for today, I asked you to share an early experience on your journey to leadership, something that impacted you personally. And you told me, and I'm going to quote, accountability and transparency are the true traits of effective leadership. And you cited 2 lessons, but you only told me kind of the lesson. I want to ask you if you would share the story. You told me the battle isn't over unless you give up, and no surprises. What were the stories behind those 2 things? Where did those come from?
So my first job in Washington, D.C. in historic preservation, when I had already cut my teeth on a statewide directorship in Oregon, running a statewide nonprofit, I was hired and moved to Washington, D.C. And within about a month or 2, I got a phone call from some folks down in Southern Virginia that said, listen, there's a major corporation and they want to tear down 9 buildings in our historic downtown. And one of our state legislators is obviously not supportive of it, but it's a big corporation and they have a lot of employment here and they own a lot of real estate. And when I got the phone call, it was a Friday, of course,
Of course.
and they were going to be going in over the weekend to shut off all the utilities to start preparing for demolition the following week. And they had gotten their permits. So I went into who was the vice president of the trust at that time and said, I don't know what we really can do. I mean, they've capped utilities. They're going to start demolition next week. It's never over until it's over. And as it turned out, this is where I learned relationships make such an impression on a community's future. The vice president spoke to the president. The president happened to be on the board of the Ford Foundation, and he had on the board of the Ford Foundation this major corporation, the wife of the CEO of this major corporation, and she was a PR person. And so she called her husband and she said, this is an insignificant project for this company, and it is bad PR. I would suggest you work with the legislator and the National Trust to see if you can come up with a solution rather than demolishing these 9 buildings. And sure enough, Monday morning, that stopped. And they actually did a redevelopment project on that block instead. So that's where I learned early on, you think you're going to give up. Somebody knows somebody that can make a difference and makes them accountable to what the community really wants. And the community did not want to lose this block of historic buildings.
You mentioned earlier the need to hire a new city manager. In any community, hiring a city manager is a big responsibility. And I understand it happened early in your term. And it was the first time that your cities had to hire a new manager in quite a long time. If you get a phone call today from the mayor of another city who says, hey, I know you went through a whole process of having to hire a city manager. Can you just tell me, I got to do this in my own community? What are the 2 or 3 best pieces of advice you can give me? What's the quick answer you're going to tell them?
I think the first thing is to talk with your other council members and make sure you're all on the same page, because you don't want to get to that last interview and find out something new you hadn't known before. So you start with your council members and you have those individual discussions about what is it we're looking for. Are we looking for a change maker? Are we looking for somebody that's going to just keep things moving the way they are? So, and what are the...
That sounds like a values question here. What are the values that we're going after?
Yes. What are the values that they hold that are the same values that our community has, not just us, but us and our community? So that would be the first thing, is to make sure you're on the same page with your council, because you're making the ultimate decision. And then I think you do need to step outside, of city government and talk to the community and say, this is a decision that's extremely important, not just to us as your leaders, but to you as a business owner, you as a head of the nonprofit, or you as the head of the hospital. What are you looking for in terms of relationship and leadership at that executive level for your city? And you hear a lot of things. They want them engaged. They want them to be part of the community. They'd prefer they live in your city. They'd prefer to see an investment in the city. Are you a homeowner in the city? Are you out at the city events, meeting people? Do you make a phone call and say, listen, I'd like to go out and have lunch with you, every couple of months? So it was really very much in our community about outreach and engagement, but leader to leader. So that would be my second, is to really talk outside to the community. And while I do think it's critical for you to understand the culture of your government, your staff, I also think you have to balance that with the future. What are you looking at as your vision? So be very clear, particularly when you're doing the interviews with your candidates, that this is where we want to go. And you get that information from your council. And this is why I got elected. Economic development is critical. Our downtown is critical. Addressing the issues of homelessness and creating more opportunities for jobs for individuals, addressing issues of behavioral health or substance abuse. Those are the things. Those are our top priorities. Protecting our parks, these were the top priorities for us. So I think that was partly our strategic plan. So that helped us with our candidate selection.
Here's what I think I just heard are your top three. I'm going to do it really fast.
Sure.
It's talk to your council about what the values are that we're looking for, that we think are important for our city. Then go out and bring together a variety of stakeholders and ask them to talk about what are the priorities that they see for the community. And then find a city manager candidate who can be deeply invested, who can demonstrate that they're deeply invested in the outcomes that the community wants in accordance to the values that the city council has set.
Yes, absolutely.
I have one last big question I want to ask you, and then I'm going to ask you some lightning round questions if you want, but I don't want to escape without asking you this. To be a council member and to be a mayor can be a rather parochial job. You know, you're called upon to make decisions in the best interests of your community. But I also know that you serve in positions that are about regional cooperation. And I'm just very curious, very briefly, to ask you, what have you learned about the duality of juggling the best interests of your residents and the best interests of the region as a whole? And, and are those interests ever actually in conflict with each other?
I think that's an exceptional question. Regionalism is where we in the state of California are moving, whether it's in economic development, whether it's in technology, whether it's in transportation. We are so interconnected county to county to county and reliant, particularly when we work together as a region or even a mega region in the Central Valley, and we lobby our state and federal leaders for the funding we need for whether it's transportation or clean energy or economic development or rail. I sit on the Rail Commission as well as the Council of Governments. You're able to provide a broader, deeper, and more resonant voice when you talk as a region. Now, there are times when you ask yourself, when you're sitting on that dais and you have to make a decision that may put your city at the bottom of the priority list, will this benefit our residents? Will this truly provide the kind of economic engine that we as council members individually had promised them as part of our campaign and as part of our city council actions? And sometimes you have to make the decision that yes, but not right now. Yes, having a regional connection will eventually turn into an economic or an equity opportunity for those individuals. But we need to get other communities there first. And so we'll take a back seat on this. But it's also been the other direction. For example, with our hydrogen hub, we were selected as the number one project during our One Voice trip back in May to visit with our federal officials to secure both funding and regulatory changes we needed to be successful with a project that is actually a Northern California-based project. And so we had extremely strong support from our county board of supervisors, from the mayors and electeds from our surrounding communities, and from the power agency that we work with, which is 16 other entities, including like the Port of Oakland. So that sense of regionalism carries a lot more weight with your federal agencies and your elected officials in DC when they see you working together, because they feel like that investment is being leveraged. And particularly if you're a community of 70,000 people, we need that larger voice.
Mayor Lisa Craig, it's time to ask you the lightning round questions in which I challenge you to answer these in one sentence or less. Are you prepared?
Oh my gosh. We'll give it a shot, won't we, Matt?
Mayor Lisa Craig, describe your leadership style in just 3 words.
Partnership, communication, and future looking.
Oh, you squeezed a 4th one in there, but there was a hyphen, so it works.
Yeah, it's a hyphen. Thanks, Matt.
What's the best leadership advice you've ever received?
Stick to it.
For a first-time visitor to Lodi, California, what's an experience they absolutely have to have?
Oh, they have to drink our wine, or at least bring a friend that drinks wine, and go to our Lodi Wine and Visitors Bureau, and you'll have a good time.
Mayor Craig, if you could instantly gain one new skill, What would it be?
I think while I can keep up to things like a Zoom meeting, really understanding technology and the role technology plays in the future, in particular, I think I'd like more tech experience.
Are you talking about AI or social media
Yeah,
or what?
AI. I would talk about, well, on social media, not so much because social media I can do, but I think the AI is really the future. And hey, I can use Chat GPT, but what is there beyond that? So yeah, I would say AI.
How do you take care of yourself, especially during challenging times?
I walk my dog. I have a corgi. So, and there's just something about these little animals that we have that make us feel like, you're loved all the time. And I would say that I just try to focus on my husband, on my dog. I talk to my sons who are still living in Maryland, but I am a workaholic and I get great joy from my work. I'm a Rotarian. I get great joy from service above self is our motto. So I guess I would say that's the case.
Mayor Craig, what's one small change in the way Lodi does local government that could have a big positive impact on how it serves the community?
I think eventually I'd like to see us get some type of a service center in our more underserved neighborhoods. I think that putting government in the neighborhoods is along with my concept of going to them and not making them come to City Hall. I think that we saw that in policing, for example. That is one thing I would like to see us accomplish.
Excellent. Again, one sentence answers for these.
Sorry, Matt.
Mayor Lisa Craig, in the movie version of your life, who plays you?
Katharine Hepburn.
Excellent. If you could spend 1 hour in conversation with any leader, past or present, who would you choose?
Abraham Lincoln. He was a strong, gentle, convivial builder of relationships, partnerships, and he was sensitive to people and their stories.
By the way, as I ask this question all over the place, Abraham Lincoln, the number one answer.
I am sure.
We are all amazed at the weight that he bore.
Mm-hmm.
Mayor Craig, if you could send a message to yourself back in time to the moment just before you decided to run for city council, what would it say in one sentence?
Keep in mind Granny, who I met out on the campaign trail. And the first thing Granny did when she saw a woman running for office was hug me. And I try to keep her in mind all the time. But I would just say, remember Granny.
I have to ask that meant something to you. What did that hug convey to you? What did it mean?
It made me feel like I was back home because that's what my town is. We have a senior population, an older population. I'm inspired by my mother who started a business at 19 years old with my father and with my grandmother. And so when Granny gave me that hug, when she saw I was running for office, definitely could have been her granddaughter, believe it or not, that inspired me to.
This was symbolic of the community welcoming you with open arms.
It was symbolic of the community. It reminded me of my grandmother who's passed on. And it made me understand how important it was for women to see other women taking leadership roles. So, matter of fact, that was my State of the Union. I just completed our State of the Union, State of the City. I just completed on Wednesday. It was all about honoring women leaders in our community, and that's important to me. Is to let those individuals know that they are part of our city's strength.
Last question, Mayor.
Mm-hmm.
We live in divisive and challenging times. What makes you optimistic for the future?
I think in some respects, the fact that we do live in divisive times. I mean, if you think when this nation was founded, there was division. And I think that's what makes us strong. The fact that we actually can disagree, but at the end of the day, we end up coming together as one nation. And again, I think back about Abraham Lincoln. It was about keeping the Union whole. And so our communities stay whole, notwithstanding that we may have differing opinions.
Mayor Lisa Craig, thank you so much for being open to this conversation. It's been really great talking to you.
Thank you, Matt. It's been great and helped me learn a little bit more about myself as well. So thank you.
A heartfelt thank you to Mayor Lisa Craig of Lodi, California, for joining us today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider rating and reviewing Community Catalysts on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Your support helps others discover the show. This episode was edited by Nick Living the Dream Tantillo. Our executive producer is John Little. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. If you have a question or comment about today's topic, I'd love to hear from you. Reach me at 602-688-2724 or matt@socialprosperity.us. And if you or someone you know has a story of community leadership that would be a great fit for a future episode, let's connect. I'm always on the lookout for impactful people and compelling stories. Click the podcast link in the program notes. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.